Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. We have a special guest on today. My guest is none other than Gary Sinise. I'm going to read you some excerpts from his bio because there's so much to this man. I want to get right into it, okay? But Gary is the founder, president, and chairman of the Gary Sinise Foundation. Gary's stage, film, and television career has spanned more than 4 decades. In 1974, at 18 years old, he co-founded Chicago's Steppenwolf Theater Company. And 20 years later, for his performance as Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, he received nominations for Golden Globe, Screen Actors Guild, and Academy Awards, and earned the Best Supporting Actor Award from the National Board of Review and the Commander's Award from the Disabled American Veterans, something he is very proud of to this day. Other filming credits include Apollo 13, Ransom, Snake Eyes, Imposter, The Green Mile, Mission to Mars, and The Human Stain. His work is just so profound on the professional side in terms of his acting craft. But for over 40 years, Gary has also stood as an advocate on behalf of America's service members, first responders too, I might add, and their families. It began in the early 80s, where he was supporting local Vietnam veterans groups in the Chicago area, to include the play Tracers, which we'll talk about, and into the 90s, when his portrayal of Lieutenant Dan formed an enduring connection with service members throughout the military community. He worked on behalf of the Disabled American Veterans Organization, which he continues to support to this day. And then following the attacks of September 11, as you'll see in this interview, it really was a profoundly changing moment in Gary's life, and his dedication to our nation's active duty defenders, veterans, first responders, and their families has really become just a tireless crusade of support, service, and gratitude for all those who protect our freedom and serve our country. And, you know, Gary says it best when he says, while we can never do enough for our defenders and their loved ones, we can always do a little more. And he lives this every single day. He has become a dear friend, mentor, someone that I've come to lean on as we've collaborated together on so many projects. And I know you'll feel the same way after you see this interview. So without any further ado, Gary Sinise. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast, where we connect like our lives depend on it. Hey, what's up, teammates? Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast with my dear friend, Gary Sinise. Gary, so good to have you here, buddy.
Thanks, bud.
Man, I can't believe we're sitting down talking in our podcast space. It means the world that you came up from your vacation spot to do this. Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Well, look, let's get into it because I know the time, when you and I start talking, time goes fast. And so we have a lot of ground to cover today. So I thought we'd just get into it. Can we just start with, one of the things I know that you're super proud of, and I just think it's a really, you talk about it in The Grateful American, but I think it is worth revisiting, is how, can you talk about kind of your early years and growing up and how your connection to the military kind of came to be?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, as a young person, like a young kid,
Yeah.
I had no real thoughts about the military or a connection to the military. Even though my uncles had both served in
Right.
World War II, my grandfather was in World War I, my dad was in the Navy during Korea.
Quite a legacy.
They didn't talk about anything. Right. I mean, I wish my grandfather, who was at the Battle of the Meuse-Argonne,
Wow.
had spoken about that
Yeah.
to me. But I guess I was just too young for him to even want to
Yeah.
pay attention to that. I remember things in the basement,
Right.
when we would go visit my grandfather.
Yeah.
And like World War I uniforms and some of the stuff he would pack away and kind of kept. But did I ask him about it? No.
Yeah.
I just thought it was kind of cool, funny stuff to play with. And it wasn't until You know, it really wasn't until, and then my Uncle Jerry died. He lived in Texas, and he was on a ship in the Pacific during World War II and during the Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. He was on a ship called a landing ship tank, you know, where it was the ships that would roll in, drop the gate, and then tanks would roll out, and he was on one of those ships during those battles. But he moved to Texas with his family, so we only would see them occasionally.
Yeah.
And it was only because he became a writer that I actually even know any stories about my grandfather in World War I, because my Uncle Jerry wrote about my grandfather.
Wow.
And got my grandfather to talk about some things.
Wow.
And he wrote them down. And that's the only document or the only evidence I have that my grandfather was even in World War I.
Unbelievable.
It's what and then my Uncle Jerry would write about his experiences in World War II as well. And that's how I know about his experience in the war, because I never really saw him very much and talked to him. It was my Uncle Jack, who was the oldest of the three brothers, who served as a navigator on a B-17 bomber over Europe.
Yeah.
30 missions, that I actually spent time with him. And that was after September 11th, 2001.
Okay.
I got very involved, you know, with our wounded after Forrest Gump, and you know, was involved with Vietnam veterans back in the 80s with the tracers experiences and all of that. But really, it was September 11th that kind of
really
turned everything for me, and then I started spending time with my Uncle Jack and talking to him about his experiences and all that.
Okay. Well, something that you do bring up in Grateful American is, you know, it's near and dear to my heart too, because it led to so many opportunities for our work with the play, but as tracers, you know, you were. You know, I don't know if people know this. A lot of people do. Is that you were, you know, you're one of the founders of Steppenwolf Theater, or one of the original, you know, performers there in Chicago. And you all brought a play. You brought a play that John DeFusco wrote called Tracers. That was about the Vietnam War, and you brought it to the stage. Talk just a little bit about that, and what the because this was in the early 80s.
Yeah.
What was that like, and how did that affect you as far as, you know, your connection to the military?
Well, it was really because of my wife's brothers.
Okay.
As I said, on my side of the family, I had the veterans, right? My dad never talked about the Navy much. He was a photographer and in the Navy, and worked in D.C. during his naval 4 years in the Navy. But it was really when I met my wife, and she introduced me to her two brothers who were Vietnam veterans. Her older brother was a West Pointer. Yeah. And his name was Boyd McCanna Harris. Everybody called him Mac. And then the younger of the two brothers was a helicopter pilot, 800 combat hours in Vietnam. And then my wife's sister joined the Army, and she married a Vietnam veteran who was a combat medic. And it was really them, that, you know, meeting them that kind of made me stop and think a little bit about what I was doing when they were in the jungle and I was in high school, just not paying much attention. Yeah. And they were just a little bit older than I was. And I really started to think quite a lot about that. And so, having started Steppenwolf Theater, and I became artistic director in the early 80s, I started directing more. And I started looking for plays to direct. And they really caught they got my attention with their stories about Vietnam and all of that. And I started to feel very badly that I had been so kind of oblivious to what folks like them were doing, you know, when I was in high school. And so I wanted to find a play that spoke to that experience, and to, that told stories of, you know, what it was like to serve in Vietnam and come home, after serving in Vietnam. And I found a play that was written by John DeFusco. Actually conceived the idea to put a group of Vietnam veterans together and write a play.
Right.
And he was kind of a theater guy, and he had served in Vietnam, and he'd gone into the theater, and he thought, well, I'm going to do a theater piece about what I was doing over there, and I'm going to get a bunch of other guys together, and we'll all talk about it and write a play. And that's what they did. And they wrote a play called Tracers, and I read about it, and I was in Chicago. It was in Los Angeles, and I read about it, and I flew out to Los Angeles. My parents were living in Los Angeles at that time. They had moved from Chicago. And I went out, stayed with them, and then went to see the play a couple of times. And I was just so moved by it, knocked out by it, kind of begged them to let me do it. And I remember DeFusco said, well, we think this play should only be done by veterans, and we're going to hang on to it, and we don't want anybody to do it. And I would call him every 3 or 4 months and say, what are you doing with that play? And it ran for about a year in Los Angeles, and then it closed, and nothing was happening with it. And I just, I said, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Why don't you just let me do it? And so he gave me the rights to do it in Chicago. And I wanted all the rights because we had started taking our plays to New York.
Yeah.
And they were starting to become pretty well known. And so I wanted the rights to be able to go to New York. He said, no, I'll give them to you for Chicago. You can do it there. And so I said, okay, I'll take it. Yeah. So we did Tracers in Chicago, and it really, it was very, very powerful. It was unlike anything I'd ever done at that point. Yeah. I really wanted my cast to really understand what it was I was trying to do by doing that play. And so I got the cast to spend like 5 weeks before we even started reading the play or rehearsing it to just do stuff, like I took them to the VA and we talked to Vietnam veterans, and I took them out shooting, and, we did Tai Chi lessons. I mean, we were doing all this stuff to get prepped to work on the play. And we even went and sequestered ourselves in this. We were working on this play in like January of '84, so December '83, January '84, and I had a friend who had a relationship with a summer camp in Michigan, and it was closed obviously for the winter, right? But he could get me in there. And so we were able to go sequester ourselves in this summer camp. They turned on the heat in the cabins, and we all stayed out there. And it was like our boot camp. Right. And we did a boot camp out in the snow for like 5 or 6 days, living together out in this closed down summer camp. And that was really good. And then when we left there, we came back to Chicago and started actually rehearsing the play. So I have pictures of us on the final day in our boot camp, reading the play for the first time. We had done 5 weeks of prep and finishing with this boot camp. And then I have pictures of the guys sitting there reading the play for the first time. And it was very, very powerful. And it led to a whole thing at Steppenwolf that became our veterans program there.
It led to a whole thing that went decades into the future and resulted in, if not indirectly, directly in Last Out Elegy of a Green Beret. I read that story in Grateful American, and we'll get into that, as we go on to this, but suffice it to say, what you just covered was so impactful on me as an emerging playwright and, a guy who wanted to play that role of Danny Patton with this other group of veterans. We did, in the tour that you and the foundation signed on for, in years later, in 2023, we did an immersion just down the road with all the cast. And these were all mostly veterans, but one military family member went shooting, did all those things for several days.
They actually knew how to shoot.
They did.
Unlike my guys.
But it was so impactful to me because it's like, that's an important thing for us to do. We should go do that before we ever begin. But in the spirit of what you just said, we came right back from that immersion event, and right across the hall in this very building is where we did the first reading. like right on, it's still in our stuff.
You prepped it and then you read it.
Exactly the way y'all did it, because we wanted to honor, the spirit. Because I just felt like what you brought into the world with this process was something that was available to us and is available to a lot of other veterans and first responders as they bring their art into the world. You brokered something that I think is really profound. But anyway, so I know that was a major inflection point for you, Gary. But I mean, I have to think that the role of Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump was a catalyst moment in your journey as a grateful American. I mean, it certainly reads that way in your book. Can you talk just about that at whatever level you want to talk? But I mean, that's how so many people know you, came to know you, frankly, you brought a level of consciousness, I think, to the transitioning veteran. Not just disabled veterans, but I think veterans in transition. I think you brought a level of consciousness and awareness to people that maybe had never thought about that. Can you just kind of talk about the experience and years later, kind of how you feel about that whole thing?
Well, it was great experience. I mean, it was a movie that's lasted for decades, which none of us really, I guess, knew at the time that we were making that kind of thing. But we knew, the script was good. You could read it, and it was good. And Tom Hanks was great, and Bob Zemeckis, great director.
Right.
So we were in good company, when we were doing it. But we didn't know that it would turn into what it turned into. And I certainly didn't know what it would jumpstart for me in terms of supporting our wounded.
Right.
But, after the movie came, and we did a boot camp for Forrest Gump, too.
Sure.
And I got to say, well, I've already done a boot camp. I've already done my Vietnam boot camp. It was in the winter time. We actually went out and did some boot camp training right near Paris Island.
Okay.
Because we were shooting in Beaufort, South Carolina. And so we did some of that, and then we shot the movie. And of course, the movie turned out really well. And it introduced me to the Disabled American Veterans Organization, which I didn't know anything about prior to the movie coming out. But they invited me to come to their national convention, and that really affected me greatly, seeing all these wounded veterans going all the way back to World War II. Because this was 1994, so there were a lot of World War II veterans in there who had been wounded in World War II, and then Korea and Vietnam, and all the way up through the Gulf War. And that was really impactful, just to walk out on the stage and see all those people. And that just started me working with our wounded from that point on.
Which took you up to 9/11. But let me just ask you about, and I think you and I have talked about this one time, but I just think it's to me it's so impactful, was the scene in Forrest Gump where Lieutenant Dan is out on the shrimp boat with Forrest and the hurricane rolls in. And that scene where Lieutenant Dan really is in a fight with his faith and a fight with God, to me it's representative of those dark moments that can happen. They don't always happen, but they can happen to veterans in transition, particularly as they come home from war, when they just feel at odds with everything around them, and they feel like literally the world is a storm coming at them. And I just that scene is so profound, and there's almost no dialogue in it. It's such a physical scene, such an immersive scene, and then in the morning, that calming plunge into the water where you just know he's going to be okay, and he knows he's going to be okay. Did you know what you were filming in that moment? Like, did you have any idea what it was that you were bringing into the world in terms of, a message to veterans that were in that place? I just have to ask, like, or was it just like, okay, I got to do this scene?
Well, it's kind of a combination of both, because the actor is thinking, okay, what do I got to say? I got to be up on I got to be up on the mast up here, and I'm strapped in up there, and they're blowing
Yeah.
They're blowing wind at me and they're shooting water at me and there's a jet engine over here blowing at me and they're rocking the boat and everything. So I've got to, I'm thinking as an actor, I've got to do all these things just to manage the scene, right?
Right.
And then I remember I was screaming during all that, right? Yeah. But, of course, all that sound was going to be changed later because you hear the jet engine, you hear the Ritter fams going.
Yeah.
So I had to recreate the voice later on in the studio. So Bob Zemeckis says, Gary, save your voice. We're going to have to replace the dialogue later on. You're screaming up there. You don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But how do you act screaming? Right. And not scream.
Yeah.
So I said, Bob, I can't do anything but scream up here. I gotta just act it out. So I barely had a voice at the end of the scene.
Wow.
Luckily I had some time off to recover my voice after that. So that's the actor kind of thinking through the actor stuff. Then there's the scene.
Yeah.
And the story.
Yeah.
Of Lieutenant Dan, which is, if you look at it, it's a beautifully crafted little story.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a small part of the movie. It's, you meet Lieutenant Dan, he's hardcore, right? Yeah. He's the guy you want leading the platoon, right? You're going to follow him because he's tough and he's strong and he's a good leader. Yeah. And he walks his platoon into an ambush. Bunch of people get hurt. Bunch of people get killed. He doesn't want to leave the battlefield. He wants to die on the battlefield. Forrest changes all that by carrying him out.
Yeah.
So he resents because he's got his own resentment
and guilt
of himself. His guilt that he let his platoon down.
Yeah.
So he's dealing with a lot of post-traumatic stress. He drowns it, of course.
Yeah.
Later on, we see him in New York, and he's drowning in alcohol and substance abuse and isolation, all these things. We understand all that. He shows up, he gets a letter from Forrest, shows up, ends up on the shrimp boat with them, and then he fights with God.
Yeah.
And lets it out.
Yeah.
Come on, give me everything you got.
Yeah.
I can take it, And who wins at the end of that? Lieutenant Dan comes out okay, and he's standing up again at the end of the movie, and he's moving on, and he's doing well. He's a wealthy businessman.
He's home.
So it's a beautifully crafted little story. Did I know that particular scene would resonate the way it did? I guess I always thought that's the scene where every veteran who is dealing with something like that has that moment where he's screaming.
Yeah.
He's letting it out. Or they should. We want them to let it out, and we want them to win.
Yeah.
We want that story of Lieutenant Dan to be the story, the happy ending of that story. We want that happy ending for everybody who goes to war and comes home from war.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want anything other than that. We want them to move on and be okay, just like Lieutenant Dan. And so I knew that story was a story that would be shared by thousands and thousands and thousands of veterans out there who understand exactly what that is.
Yeah.
And I suppose, Scott, that's why I've heard from so many, that they thought that was a portrayal that was somewhat different from other portrayals of Vietnam veterans in movies up to that point.
Yeah.
That it was the portrayal they were looking for. It was the the good ending of a story that they were looking for. And I've heard from, countless veterans about that over the years.
In real time. I mean, you've looked in their eyes as they're telling you they were, I'm sure, that they were in that moment, that they've had that moment. Yeah. And even though they weren't Vietnam veterans, even that they were Iraq War veterans or, just cause.
It's a war experience. You come home with that stuff, you come home with that stuff. we want everybody to process it in the proper way, right?
Yeah.
And not isolate, and sequester themselves, without letting that hurricane moment happen, and then having that successful outcome of that moment.
Well, I think that's one of the beautiful things about storytelling, whether it's on film, whether it's on the stage, or whether it's just, in real time. There's a term that I learned just in the evolution of learning the craft of storytelling and performance and acting, which is generosity, in the context of what we're talking about here. And, it's just astounding to me that, right, you didn't serve in the military, but the generosity by which you brought to that scene, where you gave like everything you had to that scene, to that particular part of the story, decades later, people are still locating themselves in that moment and making meaning out of something that makes no sense. And I just think to me, that's kind of the beauty and the generosity of storytelling when we're willing to do that, when we're willing to put ourselves into those kinds of stories. It lets other people figure stuff out.
Yeah, that I guess that's the beauty of that particular character, is that, again, when you think about it, Scott, think about the movies the Vietnam. Let's just take Vietnam first.
Right.
Think about the movies that came out. They started to come out in the late 70s, right? The Deer Hunter.
Yeah.
Coming Home. Apocalypse Now. Platoon.
Yeah.
Casualties of War. In Country. You can name a whole bunch of Vietnam-themed movies. And if you look at the Vietnam veterans at the end of those films, you're not quite sure they're going to be okay. You know, I mean, look at Bruce Dern at the end of Coming Home. What does he do? He takes off his uniform and swims out in the ocean. He's not coming back.
Right.
It's the ending that we don't want for anybody. Them to feel that that's the only course of action that they can take is to strip it down and give it up. And along comes Lieutenant Dan, and we hadn't seen that story before.
Right.
We of a Vietnam veteran who could have a difficult time, but
no
win.
peace. Actually, just no peace.
And the story of and this was not an unheard of story. I mean, we heard the stories of Vietnam veterans over and over that they were not okay and they didn't do well and they came home and they had trouble and all that stuff. And there were plenty of Vietnam veterans like that. But what we hadn't heard is about the guys that came home and processed it and moved on and turned life, went into the next phase of their lives and were successful and did okay. Look at Fred Smith, who just died recently. Marine, Vietnam veteran, difficult stuff, Marine stuff. Came home, started FedEx.
Yeah.
And successful businessman and did well and went on to do great things and,
played a major role in Operation Pineapple Express.
Yeah.
In our ability to get our allies out. He was behind the scenes, and not just with our group, with a lot of groups, enabling a next generation of warfighters to bring their allies home.
God bless Fred.
I'm telling you.
He never forgot.
An iconic American. For sure.
Just a tremendous
100%.
individual. I had the privilege to know him, and he supported some of our work at the Gary Sinise Foundation, helped us build a couple of houses and all that kind of thing. And that's the story of a guy who, had difficult stuff happen, came home and was able to be successful. And that's the story of Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan came home and we had a positive he moved on with his life. And that's what we want everybody to do when they come home from war. We want that to be able to. They're never going to leave it, it's always going to be with them. But we want them to be able to move beyond it and have a happy life.
Yeah, I love it, and I know you embody that as you talk. As you deal with our veterans today. A little aside on Fred Smith. He never missed an opportunity during the evacuation to tell me that we needed more Marines on our team to better plan what we were doing.
Of course.
Okay, so we talked about the Vietnam era. And Forrest Gump, and then disabled veterans of America, disabled American veterans, reached out to you, honored you for your work as Lieutenant Dan, and in appreciation of really, I think, bringing to the consciousness what so many of our disabled veterans go through. Was that kind of an epiphanal moment for you as well? Did that, because this is on the other side of Forrest Gump, you get this recognition from this group, and I think you even said in Grateful America, it kind of shocked you that they weren't in the public consciousness. So talk a little bit about that and how that affected your role working with our community.
Yeah, I remember that. In fact, the very first page of my book, Grateful American, is all about that moment,
right.
Going to the DAV convention, and walking out on stage and having all these wounded veterans just cheering and applauding, for me playing a part in a movie. And that was impactful. So impactful that, I'm ever since I've stayed supportive of the DAV. I play their convention every year. I've done it like 20 times. I'll be there again in August playing the convention in Vegas. I do it every year. The Disabled American Veterans have been just a great relationship. They, I learned a lot from the members of the organization that I met. Very badly wounded folks who like Lieutenant Dan. Moved on. Even in spite of their injuries and difficulties, and that had a profound effect on me for sure. And and we're still working with the DAV. At Gary Sinise Foundation.
But obviously, I feel, because you and I've talked about this, I don't even know how many times, but the big catalyst moment in your life was the big catalyst moment in my life, and I think the lives of so many of us, which was 9/11. For me, I was a Special Forces captain, a senior captain at Fort Bragg when that happened. I can still remember every single thing about that day. But what I remember most profoundly about that day was my Ranger buddy, Cliff Patterson, who I was very close with. We named our firstborn sons Cody. We really went through a lot together. He was killed in the Pentagon. And so one of the first casualties out of the war was like a brother of mine, and I just remember that day setting me on a course of events. I remember coming home from Bragg, and you couldn't even, the traffic was so bad, people were parking their cars on the side of the road into Bragg and walking miles into work to get there because you couldn't get on base. And I remember it was late before I got home, and it was probably 9, 10 o'clock at night, and my little boy Cody was 3 at the time, and he's sitting cross-legged in our little 800 square foot house, playing with his toys, and Fox News was on, and it was showing the spooling footage over and over again, and I can remember just holding my wife, looking at my son, thinking, man. Like, our life just changed forever. And I had no idea how much. That was my day. What was that day like for you?
Yeah. Well, I was in Los Angeles, and I got a call in the morning, probably about 6:30. From a buddy of mine in New York, Terry Kinney, who's one of the co-founders of Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
And Terry's living in New York, and my wife came in and woke me up and I was sleeping, and she was up with the kids. The kids were little, and Terry had called, and she said, Terry's on the phone. He wants us to turn on the TV. So we did that, and of course started watching. And Terry's like, "We're under attack," and all this.
Yeah.
And so I watched for a while, and just kept watching and watched the towers come down and all of that. And I remember I had a golf game set with a buddy of mine. So I broke away from my television set and got in the shower, got ready, and left. And went and met him on the driving range. And he hadn't seen the towers come down. He had left before that happened. So he said, "Did you see what happened this morning? The plane hit the building and the building." And I told him that the towers had come down because I watched all that. And we're hitting and everything. And then I'm like, I can't play. I can't play. I got to go. Yeah. And I got back in the car and went home and put on the radio and was listening to the radio. And they were telling me, telling us all this stuff. And couple days later, Friday, remember George Bush had kind of said we're going to have a national day of prayer and remembrance for the victims of September 11th. So all the churches were packed, and, we got to our little church on that Friday, and it was packed. There was no place to sit, and we were everybody's trying to process what was going on. Images just replaying over and over and over, people falling and all the ugly stuff that we saw. And I remember coming out of the church, and I've said this, told this story before, but either the priest said this or I heard it. Or he didn't say it and I heard it. I don't know, but it was something about service. We need to serve each other. We need to pull together and help each other through this. And that service to others was going to be a way for us to get through this together. And that resonated deeply. Yeah. And so that's when I started raising my hand a lot and going out there and doing things. And things really changed for me at that point.
I remember in the documentary, your daughters and Mac were talking about how profoundly that day hit you, and it was just interesting to see it in the eyes of your children as they talked about it. They were very emotionally moved by how it hit you. And you started, you raised your hand, immediately jumped in. If memory serves, you started throwing yourself at USO opportunities for starters, right? I mean, that was some of the things that you did. What was that like for starting to roll out with the USO as the country was ramping up for war in Iraq and Afghanistan? I mean, this was a major change in the nation.
Yeah, within months. I mean, we had our Mulholland and the horse soldiers and everybody was over there doing their thing, and just within a month, maybe it was a month, like October, I think.
Yeah, it was just it was less than two before they were in, and then less than 90 days they had already pushed the Taliban out. Yeah,
I mean, it was incredible what was happening and how rapidly things were changing. And remember also, Scott, anthrax.
Oh yeah,
remember all that? I mean, that was within days. It seems like all of a sudden anthrax is going through the mail.
Yeah, the DC sniper happened a few in a year or two after that. I mean, it was
a paranoid time.
It was
because you're like
the shoe bomber.
Yeah. Oh, holy crap! What's happening?
Yeah.
And I remember being scared. I was scared. Yeah. I was scared for my family. I was scared for our country. I was scared for me. I was just scared.
Yeah.
And what do you do when you're scared? You either crawl up in a ball and hide in the corner, or you get out and go. And so I took action. That's how I kind of did combat with the heartbreak,
Yeah.
and the fear. And so I started raising my hand, and one thing an actor does is call the USO up, and say, to send me out. And so I went on my first tour to Iraq. It was after, so between between 9/11, then we go into Afghanistan.
Yep.
I remember on the 1 year anniversary of the attacks, I was heavily invested. I was in Chicago, and I was the MC of the big Chicago anniversary.
Yeah.
And we were in Daley Plaza, which is it's a big, giant plaza in Chicago. And there were 100,000 people in the plaza, and it was the remembrance ceremony on the day. Bells were ringing at the time, and, okay, it's 8:30 and the second plane hit or whatever, the bells are ringing, and, it was the remembrance ceremony. And I did readings, and I introduced different people, and I was part of that. 100,000 people singing "God Bless America," tears rolling down our faces, and it was profoundly impactful. And that was 2002. And 2003, I was in Iraq.
Yeah.
We went in March, and I was there in June with the first big overseas USO tour. And I had called the USO and said, I want to be a part of whatever's going on to support the people that are over there doing the hard lifting, So I went on my first tour, and it was a big, big, giant tour. Kid Rock was on the tour, and Leanne Womack, and
was Toby Keith on that one?
No, Toby was not on that. There was a band named Nappy Roots was on it.
Okay.
There were football players. There were basketball players. There were Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders were on that.
Yeah.
Robert De Niro was over there. I mean,
Okay.
There were a lot of John Stamos and Rebecca Stamos were there. Remember Brittany Murphy, the little gal? She died, unfortunately, but she was on the tour. I mean, there were a lot of people on the tour. Paul Rodriguez, comedian.
Yeah.
There was 180 people on a Northwest Airlines 747 going over to Iraq, and we spread ourselves out all over the place. And that was the first of 6 tours in 6 months for the USO. I just kept going. I'd get back, and then I asked them where I could go. And then I went to Italy as soon as I got back from there, and then went to Germany. And then, I was in D.C. I was at Walter Reed for my first time. I was at Walter Reed the first time ever on September 11th, 2003.
Right.
That was my first visit, and I saw a lot of banged up folks.
What was that
day.
like?
That was impactful. I mean, the first hospital visit was actually Landstuhl in August. So I was just a month before just like 2 weeks before I was at Walter Reed, I was at Landstuhl. And you know what that's like. I mean, that everybody right off the battlefield, go to Germany, get stabilized. You either get fixed up and go back to the war, or you get sent home. And so I saw a lot of very badly banged up folks that day. And that was profoundly impactful. But 2 weeks later, I was at Walter Reed, and I remember.
Did that stiffen your resolve when you saw the? Because I mean, there's just nothing quite like the gravity of combat wounds and being around that. How did that affect your resolve?
Greatly. I've told this story. Before I got there, I'm riding in the bus to get to Walter Reed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm going to see really badly blown up folks. It's going to be, what's it going to be like, and how am I going to react? And I don't know if I can do this. And, I want to do it, but I'm a little nervous, about just what I'm going to see when I get there. And the first room I walked in was about 25 or 30 1,000-yard stare guys, right?
Yeah.
They're just in there and they're quiet, and they've got burns or, whatever, scrapes and bruises, and enough to get them off the battlefield, but not enough to send them home. So they're going to be there, and they're going to get patched up, and they're going to go back to the war. But they're at Walter Reed, and they're just, you could see. I walked in, and it was quiet in there. There's 25 or 30 guys, and everybody's just sitting there and just quiet. And then one of them saw me and recognized me from Forrest Gump, and started screaming, "Lieutenant Dan!" And then the other guys started looking over, and then the whole mood changed. Like people started jumping out of their chairs and coming over and wanting a picture, and wanting to talk about Gump and blah blah blah, whatever. And the whole somber 1,000-yard stare thing just completely changed,
right,
into this sort of, hey, thanks for coming, and everybody's feeling better, right?
Right.
Then so I left that room thinking, wow, I just actually did something to help those guys. When I walked in, it was like down, and when I left, it was up.
Yeah.
And people were kind of happy. And then I went upstairs to see the badly wounded folks that were going to get sent home, and so that actually prepared me better to go upstairs, because that's when I saw all the amputations and the badly damaged heads, and all this stuff that was really difficult.
Yeah.
But I was better prepared to do that, having gone through that first moment with all the guys downstairs. And then when I got back on the bus, remember I told you what it was like when I was getting there on the bus?
Yeah.
The first thing I saw was I pulled up in the bus, and another bus pulled up right in front of us, and all these people ran out and started unloading the wounded. They had just landed, and they were being unloaded and taken into the hospital. And I'm like, whoa. But now I'm getting back on the bus, and I'm leaving, and I'm feeling, hey, I just did something positive. I just helped. And so that just made me
flip the switch, didn't it?
Yeah, and that just made me go back again.
Yeah,
and so two weeks later, I was at Walter Reed.
And so you're doing this. You're continuing to go on the USO tours. What are you saying to the USO folks? Like, are you trying to get more involved with them and what they're doing? I know I know with you as a musician, how is all that shaping up as you're trying to work your way into that organization?
Yeah, I was, because I was, as I said, that first trip to Landstuhl, that was my third USO trip in 2 months.
Wow.
So I went like mid-June of 2003. I was, mid-June, I was in Iraq. Then July 4th, I was in Italy, doing a tour in Italy, visiting troops all over. And then the end of August, I'm in Germany, and I'm doing Landstuhl and all these other military bases over there.
0405, we saw you in our mess hall, in our Special Forces mess hall in Afghanistan.
Well, see, I was kind of raising my hand and going to do whatever I could. And one thing led to another, Scott. It was just like, okay, I just kept wanting to do it. And again, I go back to what was motivating me.
Yeah.
It was fear. It was, concern. It was for my family. And I wanted to be a part of helping to prevent that from happening to our country again.
Right.
So I thought the best way for me to help, I'm not going to join the military,
right,
but I can back up the people that have joined the military. And as a lot of people were volunteering and raising their hand after September 11th. So September 11th was a turning point for a lot of different people, and it certainly was for me. It changed everything.
But you know what? Okay, so you're right. I mean, a lot of people volunteered and went over to help, and these were notables, and they lifted morale. But not a lot of people did it for 20 years, and not only, started with the USO, but then at some point looked around and said, you know what? There's more that needs to be done here, and my last book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. You looked at the landscape and you clearly saw a need, and you decided to build an organization, a foundation around that need. The Gary Sinise Foundation. Talk about that, because to me that is an astounding thing. It's one thing to go volunteer under a pre-existing institution and just do impactful work, and I love it and I respect it. But you built from the ground up, while, by the way, also maintaining your craft as an actor. Probably one of the most prolific service organizations, veteran service organizations in modern history. Like, how the hell did you do that?
It's boots on the ground, Yeah. You just.
What led you to it? What was it that sparked that desire?
I think it was one way that I felt like I could serve. Again, the first kind of big thing I did after September 11th was the USO stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just, I'm an actor, and actors go on USO trips and musicians do, and so I wanted to do that. Well, some do, yeah, but that's what I wanted to do. So that was kind of the way in. And then as I did that and did more of it, I would meet other folks that had their own nonprofits that had started after September 11th, and they were doing everything from building houses for wounded folks to packing up care packages and sending them overseas to our troops, or, whatever it was. It was a lot of different letter writing campaigns, just to make sure that, thank you letters to the troops. There were a lot of different organizations, people that were like me, American citizens who just wanted to help in some way. So they start to look to do that, for ways to do that. And so on these various trips, I would, to the hospitals and all these, I would just meet a lot of different people who were getting involved. And I thought, okay, well, one way that I can help more people is by helping some of these other organizations to raise money, to raise awareness for what they're doing. Like the DAV, all these different things. So I just started supporting a lot of different organizations. There's a list at the end of my book.
Oh, it's massive.
The call to action list at the end of that book.
Yeah, you also got a plaque on it, or in your museum.
We have it at the office. Yeah. And it's a call to action list, and I list all these organizations, many of them that I was supporting before I had my own foundation.
Right.
And so I was learning a lot of different things about where the needs were, how to fill the needs, what could be done. Somebody like me can, again, raise money and raise awareness and, all that kind of stuff. I'd do concerts for different organizations to help them, to help more people. I just wanted to help our service members out. And after doing that for a number of years, helping a lot of different organizations and everything, that's when it just, okay, what's the next step, for me? The next step is, I guess, I built a solid enough reputation in this space. People know I'm serious about it. They've seen me in the war zones. They've seen me in the hospitals. They've seen me at different events over the years. They know I'm in the game. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that to build my own organization and to do more. And now I can, instead of just raising money for a bunch of different organizations, people ask me, where can I put my money? I could say, well, I'll tell you 30 different organizations that are good, but why don't you just give it to me, and I'll make sure it gets deployed in the right areas. And so I started the Gary Sinise Foundation in 2011. We're just about to start our 15th year.
Wow. And it's just astounding to me that, that foundation, you built it, around this notion that, while we can never do enough for our warfighters, first responders, their families, we can always do a little more, and that became a rally cry, really. And if you look at just the gambit of things that you all do, whether it's, Families of the Fallen with Snowball Express, or, the homes, like for my friend Romy and Gabby Camargo that live right here in Tampa, the Rise Home program, and just so many other things. But what astounds me is that you did it over the long game. Like, this was a 20-year war. I mean, this was not this was a long endeavor. And throughout all of it, you're up on the stage playing bass in the Lieutenant Dan band. You're flipping burgers, at a hospital gathering for our wounded. Like, you never lost who you were in all of this. How did you manage your energy during that and stay connected without getting lost in it?
Yeah. Well, Scott, there's a lot to be said for service work. It gives you a great purpose. You know, when you see that it's actually impactful in a positive way, and when you see that, you kind of go, geez, it didn't really take that much.
Yeah.
For me to change that person's day from not so good to better.
Yeah.
And all I did was show up.
Is there a memory that comes to mind when you were overseas? You did so many trips overseas. Is there anyone, when you look back on it now, the Afghanistan war has ended, Iraq has wound down, Syria has wound down. Really, an entire the global war on terror, the GWAT generation, that war is in our rearview mirror. When you look back on your trips overseas, for example, and all the eyes you looked into and the hands you shook and the hugs you gave, is there any memory that comes to mind that just, puts a smile on your face, or that you just really, that will stay with you?
Well, there's many, sure. Of course. I remember being in Afghanistan, and my mission was kind of civil affairs, right? I'm helping sort of on the civil affairs front. We were providing school supplies to our troops. They would take them out, and they would give them to the kids. Like, let's say you're in some convoy, right?
Yeah.
And they're used to you coming through with mean looks and guns, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And there's tension, in that particular village. Well, we started to provide supplies, school supplies, after I started visiting schools with the troops and seeing kind of the civil affairs projects of rebuilding a school or something for the local population, and how that affected their relationship, the hearts and minds stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home from one of those trips and starting a school supply program, starting to provide these tools, for our troops. So we sent hundreds of thousands of school supply kits over to the troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, Djibouti.
Yeah, I remember.
Gosh, we sent them all over the place. And I remember there's a couple of great stories where we heard from service members who had gone through that village, a few days before, and now they're coming through and they've got supplies, and they start handing them out, and the whole mood in the town changes, right? Everybody starts coming out, getting the supplies. Kids are having fun. It's a good day.
Got some rapport.
Yeah, it's a good day. And then a couple days later, that same group is going down the road, and the little kid stops them on the road, and they're a little nervous. What's the kid doing? And it turns out the kid's pointing at the IED that's planted in the road over there, and holding a teddy bear that he got 2 days before from that same group.
Yeah,
our stuff.
Yeah.
So the supplies really made a difference. And that's profoundly impactful to me. I remember being in Afghanistan, and this was our troops trying to help these people, right? those stories weren't being told. You know, it was combat. It was things were not going well and all that. That's all we heard all the time. And I was hearing this other side of things, you know. And I remember walking into one of our hospitals at, I don't know, one of the bases in Afghanistan that I was at. And you know how the Russian mines were all over the place, right? I mean, in Afghanistan. And kids would pick them up. They looked like toys, and kids would pick them up and get hurt and whatnot. And this one doctor in this hospital in Afghanistan was telling me how he just did a brain surgery on a little girl who got blown up by one of these Russian mines. And we were, if we weren't there, she may have played with that, got blown up and lost her life.
Right.
But we were there, and he saved that little girl.
Wow.
And I was standing there listening to him, you know, and he was moved, you know, because maybe he's got his own little girl at home or something like that. And I thought, these people are over here, they're trying to do their best to make things better here
in a really crappy situation.
In a terrible situation. Yeah. And they're doing their best. And there were many instances like that where we would support in some way our service members over there, and some of the stuff was really helping out. So that just makes you want to do it again. And when I always say we can never do enough, but we can always do a little more, I'm not saying, hey, we can never do enough, but we can always do a lot more.
Right.
You know? I'm saying we can do a little more.
Right.
If you just do a little bit, you know, if everybody did a little bit, you know,
right.
Just even writing a letter or patting somebody on the back as you see them in uniform walking through the airport or something like that, that little bit can make a big difference. And if everybody's doing a little bit, we get a lot more done.
I'll give you an example of that. Right here in Tampa, you know, and they've both been on the show, Romy and Gabby Camargo. You know, Romy's a Green Beret, shot through the neck in Afghanistan, gravely wounded, almost died, paralyzed from the shoulders down, and on a diaphragmatic stimulator. He's on a ventilator at night, on a stimulator during the day. Romy was a friend of mine for years, you know, and we've gone through a lot together, he, Gabby, and I, and you know, at some point in his journey of just trying to stay healthy and stay alive, you know, they decided to open a rehabilitation center, a stay and step rehabilitation center that, you know, is probably the only one like it in the world, honestly. And certainly to be owned and managed by a combat wounded quadriplegic who's out on the floor every day motivating people. And what is astounding, though, is that when he goes home at night, there's a home that he can go back to, that Gabby can go back to, that is conducive to their unique situation, that allows them to live and thrive in a way that we would expect our veterans to be able to come home and do after giving us all of that. But what I think a lot of people don't realize about the programs that you do and some of the other programs out there is it's not just giving, like, for example, a home to someone so that they have doors that open automatically. This is a guy who has rehabilitated thousands of not just veterans, but civilians with spinal cord injury, Parkinson, traumatic brain injury. And my own father, after a stroke, walked again in that facility, you know? And when you think about what the RISE program has given them in terms of what they put back into civil society, like you said, it's a little more, but exponentially, the payload is enormous. And if you multiply that, I mean, how many homes have you all? Do you even know?
Yes. We just, from the very first home that I was involved in 2010, before I had the foundation, to just, you know, last month, it's 96 homes that I've been involved in. You know, I mean, it's a lot to build a house, so you know, it costs a lot of money, and we do it with the support of multiple corporate partners who sponsor everything from roofing to tile floors to plumbing and all these different things. and they come in, and then the American people who donate to the foundation to help us do that. So we get a lot done there. But again, I always say to people, look, you can donate to national organizations like mine, and we will make good use of those donations. But the first thing I always say to people, Scott, about helping our service members out is there are veterans in every community in the country, right?
Absolutely.
And it's kind of starts at the local level. If you have somebody in your neighborhood who is a family of a fallen hero, or somebody who's deployed, or an older veteran who's struggling or something like that, if you reach out and touch that person locally, you're doing a whole lot of good. And if everybody in the country did that, took responsibility or took the opportunity to just support our defenders, locally, the problems that we hear about with regards to the VA and veterans not getting their services and everything like that, all those problems would be reduced
dramatically
because our citizens were just taking the opportunity to say thank you and to do a little good for the men and women who serve our country.
It's something we're quite capable of, and you model it. There's a lot of people watching this who lead their own nonprofits, veteran support organizations, veteran service organizations. One of the things, you've been around for 15 years with the foundation, longer than that with your philanthropy and just your give back work. Can you, one of the things that seems defining to me, I've been to your gala, I've watched what's going on. Like there's a lot of social capital and relationships in what you've built. Can you talk a little bit about just your philosophy on human connection and relationships in terms of operating a foundation or a nonprofit? How important is it in building something like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're trying to help a lot of people, right? You need a lot of people to help you help a lot of people, right? So I always wanted to use my reputation in the military community and in this military support community to as kind of a magnet, a bit of a rallying point. Okay, Lieutenant Dan is getting involved here. He's putting his name on it. He's not only putting his name on it, but he's actually there with his shoes on and trying to do some of this. So, action does speak louder than words, I think, and I couldn't expect a lot of people to get involved with me in helping me do what I'm doing if I wasn't doing it myself.
Right.
Not only putting my time in, but my money in, and, just making the effort to go out there and say, this is important to me. It's important to me because I think it's important to our country to take care of these people and to help them. I don't think the government can take all responsibility.
No.
The government can't possibly help all the millions of veterans that we have in this country and the people that need help. I mean, we're helping on multiple fronts all over the place, and we're only one nonprofit.
Right.
Thankfully, there are multiple nonprofits out there that are doing great work, like yours. You're helping with mental wellness, with trying to teach people how to not keep their stories in, but tell their stories, get their stories out there.
Yeah.
Share them. That can be healing, not only for you to get your story out, but somebody out there listening.
Yeah.
As well. So there's a lot of efforts out there, and I think I just wanted to kind of be a person to sort of say, hey, I'm doing this. If you want to be a part of this, come on board. We'll use your help. And now we have thousands and thousands and thousands of donors that go to the foundation and support us. Multiple companies that support us in many different ways. They wouldn't be doing that. I think part of it is that because I do have a public platform,
right,
as an actor, somebody that they've seen on television and movies and everything, that might have kind of increased the rate with which my foundation has grown.
Right.
because I can get on television. I can talk about it. I can tell people what I'm seeing out there. I can tell people where the needs are and how to serve those needs and all that. But you got to put your boots on the ground and go do it. You got to work hard. I learned that from Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
I was a kid who built a theater company with pals, and it wouldn't have grown into what it is.
It's one of the
today.
most prolific theaters in the world.
It would never have done that if we didn't
started in a basement.
We put our noses into it, and we kept at it. And there were many times where we thought, well, maybe we should pack it in. Maybe it's not gonna work. But I saw what just putting the effort in can do, and you have to, if you want people to trust you, if you want people to support you, if you want people to believe in you, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to go out there and prove it.
Yeah,
that you're in it. And if I've been able to do that, and people think that that's a worthy cause, then great, we'll get a lot more done.
Well, I think you have. A couple more questions to kind of bring it home here, but I want to talk about the end of the Afghanistan war. This is actually, it kind of led to how you and I met through John Andrasik, Operation Pineapple Express. But, August 15th, 2021, at the filming of this, just a little under 4 years, hard to believe, since we departed Afghanistan in the way that we did, and a lot of allies were left behind, a lot of them killed, tortured, and a war came to an end, a 20-year war, in a way that has really profoundly affected a lot of our service members, their families of the fallen, in many ways still trying to make sense of it. I see it all the time. I hear it all the time. You've been around our community, I think, longer than any advocate has, particularly the Global War on Terror generation. You know us, you know where our hearts are, you know our journey. And of course, you're in it from the service side. Based on the way all of that went down and kind of where things are today, what is your read on the landscape of that generation of warfighters and their families? Like, where are we? What should we be thinking about? What are you thinking about at the Gary Sinise Foundation? Because we are in a new place. With that generation of warriors, with veterans in general, but certainly with that generation of warriors. What's on your mind? What's keeping you up at night as you think about, where we are now?
Are you talking about active duty folks that are still, or folks that have transitioned?
I think probably more because most of them, a large number of them are transitioning, right? So there is, a veteran population of that. But yeah, sure, the active duty population as well, because of the new things we're facing today, post 9/11, post GWAT.
Yeah.
Any of that you want to hit? I'm just wondering, because, the landscape is changing.
Yeah, for certain. And certainly, like Scott, I don't have to tell you that the withdrawal from Afghanistan really did a lot of damage to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And I mean, just the multiple deployments over a number of years already had taken their toll, right?
Yeah.
And missing your child growing up, because you're deployed all the time. And then to have that whole thing come crashing down and give it back to the Taliban, it just, anybody can understand intellectually and emotionally what that would do to somebody who gave a lot of time and effort into trying to fight that battle, So, I continue to try to speak on wellness to folks out there, and we continue to provide as much as we can, to be proactive in reaching people and getting them to think, beyond their service time, right? It's like we want everybody to have the Lieutenant Dan story, the end of the Lieutenant Dan story. if they can avoid the middle,
that'd be great.
Of the Lieutenant Dan story, that would be great.
That'd be great.
But we want them to have the ending, which is standing up again, moving on, right? Moving on. And there are, like you say, there are so many that have lost the battle with themselves. And in so many of those cases, Scott, right? There are no signs.
None.
There are no signs. You don't. The spouse, the person closest to the service member, doesn't see it coming. The best friend never saw it coming, and all of a sudden it's over.
We lost an iconic Green Beret this week. The community's rocked.
What and did we know? Did anybody know anything?
From what we can tell, it really caught a lot of people off guard.
Just nobody saw any signs.
Yeah.
And so how do you fight that? Maybe there's a way that that we as a community can be just proactive to get into the head of the person that might be considering something bad like that before they do something. And that's the proactive thing, So somebody like me who's in the public eye, who the community knows, cares about them, and has devoted a lot of time to it. Maybe hearing somebody like me say, "Don't do that," there are other ways to think about what you're going through and to get through what you're going through. Maybe that kind of proaction can help change things. I don't know. There are so many people that are struggling.
We've actually adopted. We just performed last out in Fort Carson, Colorado. 10th Special Forces Group sponsored us, and we went out there, and it was actually as part of their suicide prevention training, because there's a scene where Danny contemplates taking his life. That was autobiographical for me in the writing, but in the talk back, it was all uniformed folks in the room, and we got really real on the conversation.
Some people let some stuff out,
and a lot of chaplains were there. And I think it was, it's not a silver bullet in the sense that it's a singular thing that can solve it, but I do think it was helpful. And I think the more we can do that kind of stuff,
that's the proacting.
I think so.
That's the proaction. Because again, how do you help somebody who you don't know needs help?
Yeah.
But maybe if you say something or do something that they hear,
maybe
that can change the course. I remember there's a story of me playing on a military base. A few times this has happened.
Yeah.
Where, I got a letter from a Marine who sent me a letter and said, "You know what? Before your concert, I was going to go out in the desert.
Wow.
And take this with me. And I saw your poster, and I thought, well, before I go, I'll go to the concert." And then the concert was good, music was good, but he heard me talking.
Yeah.
And I talk at the end, and I talk about important things.
Yeah.
And it changed his mind.
Yeah.
So if I hadn't have been there, what would have happened? That's the doing a little more, By doing a little more there, I just showed up and played some music and talked, but it changed the course of that person's life. And now he's working for the VA, and, things are good. I just think the more proactive we can be with trying to reach people and to reach out to folks, the better chance that we're going to have of at least, slowing some of that stuff down. I don't know that you can ever completely solve that problem, because that's between an individual and God, or whatever, or the demons that they're wrestling with, and maybe we can help them by just showing up as much as possible and doing a little more.
And I think just collaborating with our organizations and other organizations like we do, and talking about it as we go and trying to figure it out, because it's not going to be the government that figures this out.
No, no. I mean, the government got a role to play, and
they do.
And We need them to continue to play that role, but nonprofits have a big role to play in our own defense.
Yeah.
You know,
Peer-to-peer is going to play a big role.
It's really true.
Yeah,
that's and there are a lot of effective nonprofits out there that are doing a lot of great stuff.
100%. World War II had their Bob Hope, and even into Vietnam, and I don't know if it's the proper analogy or not, but you were our global war on terror generation's Bob Hope, and beyond, in the sense that not only were you on the stage inspiring, but you were down there with us. You were in the fire bases, you were in the combat outposts, you were in the hospitals, just everywhere we looked. I can't remember. I mean, there were several times in Afghanistan you were there. And, it became just something that you expected and you saw and you were grateful for. And I've never hardly met anybody in the military that didn't have some kind of interaction with you, either directly or indirectly. And this is, probably 1.8 million Americans that fought in that war, right? And that's pretty amazing. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is, like, when I say you were our Bob Hope, and and I know you continue to play that role for today's veterans, but I think we're a little prejudiced in the sense that, like, you were ours during the war. You were ours during a very, very tough time in our life. You were there for us. But what a lot of people don't know is that for at least the latter part of that war, during a lot of it, you were quietly enduring, a battle on your own home front, illness in your family, but most profoundly with your son, Mac. I saw it. When you and I would talk behind the scenes and, what you were going through and what you were doing, and still finding a way somehow to get to concerts, to do things that were with putting yourself out there while simultaneously, caring for your son as that disease took him from us. And I think for me, and a lot of the people who know you well, that's why you were our Bob Hope, is because the fact that you did all that when all that was happening, like, I can't imagine. So where are you now that Mac has passed? Where are you now? You're doing some amazing things with his music. He was an amazing artist. Where are you now with that? And how has his art helped move to the next ridgeline in all of this?
Well, thank you, Scott. I've losing a child is it's now unlike anything I've ever experienced in terms of sadness or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the hardest thing, I turned 70 years old this year, and there have been many hard, we all go through a lot of hard stuff, and difficult stuff. And I've certainly been through a lot of hard things, but nothing compares.
Yeah.
Nothing is as hard as this. On the other hand, there are so many blessings that have helped, throughout this. Not the least of which was Mac himself, and how he faced this battle and the kind of person he was, and all the way to the end.
Yeah.
He showed us how to live, and he showed us how to die, and with courage and grace. And I learned so much from my son, and I continue to. Every day. I'm still after he after he died, I found a lot of music in his files that he had written and tucked away, and ended up doing a second record. He had produced the last year of his life. He produced his first record, Resurrection and Revival, and then I remember Scott just, I picked up his phone, after he died, and, I'm just sitting at my desk, and, you can imagine you're just sitting there and you're thinking, and I picked up his phone, I started looking, and I go into his laptop, and I start looking, and thankfully I had his passwords, and I could get in, and then I start discovering all these messages that he wrote, videos that he made, that he, like late at night, talking to the camera, talking to his phone, and they were things that he intended for us to find later. They were just things he wanted to say, and things he wrote that he wanted us to find later. And Mac, it turns out that Mac was he was very wise and very practical. As much as I didn't want to accept that he had an incurable cancer, because I was the battle buddy, I was the colonel leading them down the road, and I wasn't going to stop till mission accomplished, right? As much as I was doing that, Mac was very practical and understood what he was facing and what he had. Mm. And so he was, in some ways, just preparing. And I realized that later.
Wow.
How much he was kind of preparing and accepting that we might not find the cure. As much as we kept trying. And he was ready to continue all the way up to the final trip to the hospital. We had scheduled another treatment of another drug, and things were getting harder for him. He was having trouble breathing, and yet he was not giving up. He was still in the fight and wanted to keep going. And then I started discovering just more things, like more music, and every day, even now, I produced a second record of his music. I think there's a third, because I keep going through his files and I keep finding more stuff. And it's like Mac left this treasure box of these gifts. And like his dad is going to find this stuff. And thanks. Like he I don't know, maybe he didn't think that. Maybe I'm just making that up, but there's so much of it that I'm just on a mission now.
Yeah.
To kind of whatever I can find that he created, I want to bring it to life and share it. And so every day, Scott, I think about Mac every minute. Yeah. I'm constantly listening, to things. I'm searching his emails. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. It's like, it's helped me for sure to get through this past year and a half by having these projects and to going to work on this and to share what I've discovered even more so since he died is kind of a very wise. I knew he was talented, but yeah. I guess I guess maybe I underestimated him in some ways because he was such a humble guy about the way he would deal with it. Like writing, orchestral pieces and tucking them away on his in his files and not sharing them. Like, and did you know? I think I told you that one of his pieces was played by the National Symphony Orchestra this year.
Yeah, you did tell me that.
At the National Memorial Day concert.
Memorial, we have the clip, and we'll put it in the show notes so that people can watch it. It's astounding.
Yeah. I mean, that piece is one that he wrote and put it over here and never played it for anybody. I didn't hear.
And what's the one? Is Arctic Circles?
Arctic Circles.
Oh, my gosh. We play that. So we play that in our story workshops when the veterans are writing.
Incredible.
So that they can open up and, I mean.
Express.
So I think what you both are showing us is how art can heal. I mean, you've been in the arts all your life. You started as a storyteller from the stage, then film, musician. And then, of course, Mac picks it up with his wonderful musical capabilities, composition. But you're finding healing and meaning in the arts. And it's something that I'm really starting to pick up on as a veteran for our first responders and our military families. I know you all have a program for it in the foundation. But there's something about art and healing that is almost otherworldly.
Well, and music is something, no matter where you are, what culture you're in, what planet you're on. I mean, music is a universal language that speaks to everybody. Everybody has a kind of an emotional reaction to things that we hear, right, through our ears.
Yeah.
And it does things to our emotions. And when you listen to some of Mac's music, like the one you just mentioned that you play, Arctic Circles, it's profoundly moving. I mean, it moves.
It stirs your soul.
Yeah, it does. And any great piece of art does that. It just stops you and makes you think and makes you feel. It makes your heart do things. So we, again, we are blessed that our son was as capable as he was as a musician, as a composer, and left us all these treasures. You know, not every family has that. But we did. So we're deeply saddened, at his loss. I don't miss watching him struggle with what he was dealing with, a very, very rare cancer, chordoma. It's
brutal.
Yeah, it's 300 people are diagnosed with it in the U.S. a year. That's rare, and about 90% of the time, it really metastasizes and spreads, and then it's deadly. 70% of the time, they can maybe take the initial tumor out and get it all, and it's gone.
Yeah.
But Mac had metastatic chordoma, which spread throughout his body, and it disabled him as time went on. He couldn't play music anymore.
Yeah.
But in the last year of his life, he started thinking about that piece, Arctic Circles. It was something that he started in college writing, and he never finished it. And he finished it and recorded it, and it turned into a whole album of music. And that led me to start searching his files and finding all this additional music. Next thing you know, one of his pieces is being played by the National Symphony Orchestra in front of 100,000 people on the West Lawn of the Capitol and 12 million people watching on television. And that was a piece that he wrote and put it over here and I had never heard it. I found it later. And now it's being played. And they're going to actually play it next year at Wolf Trap. They're going to play Arctic Circles at a big event in Washington, D.C. in November. Some of his music is really being discovered and embraced. And so, again, when I say that we're deeply saddened, but there are many blessings. There are many blessings that I get to talk about Mac like this and share his life and share his music and his artistry. I just put up a new video on his YouTube channel yesterday. It's Mac playing the drums, like an 8-minute video of he made it in 2015. He was just getting out of college, and I remember talking to him. I said, you need a video of you playing all these different styles so that you can give it to people and get some jobs. That's because he was like, how am I going? Now he's out in the music world and he's a drummer. That's his first thing. But he wanted to compose for movies. But bread and butter was drumming, so he was playing gigs with everybody. And he made a video, and I just put it up yesterday. It's 10 years old.
I can't wait to check it out.
But it's Mac. Just you can see how good he is.
I'm a former drummer. I can't wait to check it out.
Oh, yeah. We just put it up like last night, Scott.
And I think the thing that you're doing, Gary, that you and Mac are doing is you're showing how art and music and storytelling can heal us when we're coming through something really rough. And even in the veteran community, first responder community, what I've learned from watching you as his dad bring his work into the world, it really has inspired me, much like Tracers has inspired me with Last Out, to really pursue this line of veterans in the arts. As we talk about the new place we're in, and it's not for everybody, but when you think about the creative side of us and what we have inside of us to put good into the world, there's so much available, with music and storytelling and theater and writing, entrepreneurialism, and it's just something I think. Another thing that we can do on the proactive side is to really start talking about something we're going to do on this podcast is we're going to start really diving into veterans in the arts, talking to, people that are doing that at a high level, like Rob Riggle, but then other people like our mutual friend, Matt, who plays guitar, as therapy for himself and his friends. But do you have any...
Matt said I'm supposed to tickle you or something.
Oh, that's just weird. That guy's not right. That's an agency
It's not
thing,
right,
man.
I totally ignored it.
Can we just tell him we did? Yeah. What is your thoughts and what advice would you give to veterans, first responders, family members of them who are thinking about putting their art into the world as a way of healing and connecting? You've done it your whole life. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I know it was great therapy for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I was it wasn't like I was a military guy who was struggling with, that kind of thing. But I was struggling as a young kid.
Military doesn't have the market cornered on trauma and struggle.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I was a kid who was, we lived in one town, then we moved to another town, then we moved back to the other town, but the friends that I had before weren't my friends anymore, and it was a difficult transition. And when you move around as a young kid, go to different schools, it can mess you up and stuff like that. So I was struggling, and I fell into the arts. I fell into the theater thing, and all of a sudden I found this community, and everybody was interested in the same kind of thing, and it was very nurturing. It healed me in a lot of ways, and it gave me strength and confidence because I'm performing now, and I'm performing in front of people, and they're laughing at things, and I'm getting reactions, and they're crying at the sad parts, and all of a sudden you're feeling like I can move people with just letting them see inside. Yeah. And if I move people like that, maybe that's going to do something for them, so it makes you want to do it again. Songwriting can do that, art in any form can do that. We're supporting a great organization called Creative Vets, Creative
they're
Vets.
Amazing.
Yeah, and Richard is doing a great job there with songwriting and all of that, teaching people, veterans through arts. They're doing a great job.
We should get him on the show.
You should.
Yeah.
You should. We have a big thing going with them. They're Nashville based.
Okay.
And so we're in a great partnership with them, supporting them. But they've done a lot of great work, helping a lot of veterans who are learning guitar. Do you know Scotty Hastings?
I do.
So Scotty, his story, and got shot 10 times. Never played guitar before. It's COVID. He's depressed. He's down and out. Things, he's recovering, picks up the guitar, gets a YouTube video, starts to teach himself guitar. This is in like 2020 during the COVID, right? within a year or two, he's got a recording contract.
Yeah.
And he's writing songs. He did the National Memorial Day concert with us this year.
Amazing.
So Scotty Hastings, he's got a wonderful story, and music has saved his life.
And
there's no question.
So many of our veterans and their family members and first responders are doing this. Like they're picking it up, and like I don't know if you know this, but when we toured with Last Out, we played 3 songs at intermission. All 3 of the songs were about veteran mental health and overcoming suicidal ideation. They were all written by veterans and performed by veterans and played at intermission. And they came up to us on the road with these demos, said, "Hey, would you listen to this?" And we ended up working them in and playing them on the road.
Fantastic.
But the point here is whether you're doing it like on the stage like Scotty did, or whether it's, just for yourself as a modality for healing, I really think that the arts, represent something very powerful, which is where I'm going to bring it for our close. I could sit and talk to you all day. The way you and I met, because people always ask me how we met. And I go back to, 2021 when Afghanistan collapsed. We, COVID had shut down our play Last Out. We were already, touring on our own. We put 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van, and COVID shut that down. And people
Very impressive.
People kept telling me, well, we Steppenwolfed it.
That was impressive, though.
We Steppenwolfed it. And, it was your book, Grateful American, honestly, that I read because I was so frustrated. I'm 50 years old. I'd never written a play, never acted. I just felt the urge to do that, to put it out there. And I was so frustrated. And I picked up Grateful American, and there, like the very front of the book is the Steppenwolf tracer story. And I just got a big grin on my face of like, somebody's done this. Like, it's actually been done. There's a precedent for it. And I took a lot of heart with that. And people kept telling me, you should get Gary to see the play. And I'm thinking, yeah, he's a little busy. And then Afghanistan collapsed. And we had already shut the play down. We had made it a film on Amazon Prime. But that was it. It wasn't going to do anything else. And then I met our mutual friend, John Ondrasik, who contacted me on X and said, "Hey, we're trying to get some people out. Can we work together?" And we did. He watched the film at some point, and he said, Gary Sinise should see this. And I said, "Believe me, I've tried. He's very busy." And he said, "No, I can get it in front of him," and he did. And you watched the film. And then within a couple of days, I get a text from you. It was like, "Scott, can we talk?" And I just, after I picked myself up off the floor, I showed it to Monty. I had tears in my eyes. And I think we talked for nearly 2 hours, our first time to talk, and we talked about everything. And I told you about how much of an impact tracers had made in our life. And you said, "Let's do it," and I'm like, "Do what?" And, "Let's do the play. Let's put it in Steppenwolf. Let's put it on the road." And in short order, this thing was touring again. And what I want to leave you with, and I'm going to give you a chance to weigh in however you want, but what I don't know that you realize is that putting that play back on the road at the time that you did, it saved countless lives. There's no doubt in my mind. I've been told many, many times the number of people that it saved, the people that it just helped make sense of it, to be heard and seen in these talkbacks at a time when they felt completely like the nation had turned the page on them, like their politicians had even their generals had turned the page on them. It gave them a way to be seen and heard at a critical moment, much like what you did with our Vietnam veterans in Steppenwolf and Tracers. And, even in San Diego, we're performing this play. I've never acted in my life, and I've got Gary Sinise sitting in the audience in San Diego. But we also have, the mom of one of the 13 who fell in Afghanistan sitting there watching that show. And she told us afterwards what an impact it made. So I hope you understand, and that's just one of thousands of touch points that you made possible for us with Last Out. And something that I wanted to present to you, it's not much, but it is this is the script for Last Out. And it was, it's signed. The cast has since moved on, but this is the cast. We only had a few of these left, but this is from the cast that performed when you sponsored us. And then it just says, "To Gary Sinise, thanks for believing in us and helping us tell our story to the world. We love you. Team Last Out."
Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
So I'll leave it. The floor is yours. What did we not talk about, cover? I know we've covered a lot of ground. Just anything that you want to say, Gary, to our audience about, where we are, where we've been, where we're going. Close us out.
Well, just to finish on the Mac side, I'd encourage anybody listening to go to his YouTube channel, Mac Sinise YouTube.
Okay, we'll put that in the link.
And check out the YouTube videos there of some of the music that is on these two albums. That's important to me right now. And we actually sell the vinyl. We sell vinyl copies.
Nice.
That Mac wanted to have vinyl copies to give to friends.
He's an old soul.
And he said if we ever sell any, the proceeds could go to the foundation. So now we've sold, over 8,000 vinyl copies of his records, and all the proceeds, as he wanted, go to the Gary Sinise Foundation to help our mission there. So please check into us. You can go to GarySiniseFoundation.org for that. At Gary Sinise Foundation right now, we're as I said, June 30th, we begin our 15th year at the Gary Sinise Foundation. We've raised we've raised hundreds of millions of dollars at the Gary Sinise Foundation and deployed it in various ways all over the place to try to do more. My mission has always been about, how can we spread ourselves out and do a little more, and that's why you see the mission is so broad at the foundation. We can do something like Last Out. It fits into certain buckets, which is this is a mental wellness effort here. We want to support that. We want to reach veterans and tell. To teach them how to tell their stories and watch other people tell their stories, right? And the fact that you were performing that with a group of veterans was just the timing couldn't have been better, Scott, for us to meet, because I was wanting to expand our services, and the play really gave us a great opportunities to get in front of a lot of people and share those. And every time we went to another city, we did more PR, we did more press, we talked to more people heard about what you were doing with Hero's Journey and then Gary Sinise Foundation, all that. Look, I want people out there to know that if you're in the military, if you're a veteran struggling, whatever, there are multiple services for you and your friends. And if not for you, how about your friends? Because that's the way this is really going to help. It's the peer-to-peer help that is the key.
Absolutely.
I think
100%.
If you call your buddy up that you haven't talked to in for 6 months and just say what's going on, that can make a world of difference. All of a sudden, maybe you're changing that day into something really positive. When it could have been negative. And so the battle buddy thing is really the key. And I encourage any veteran, check on your buddies, call them up, talk to them, see what they're doing. If you lost touch, find their number again, call them up again. I know there are a lot of veterans that never change their numbers for that reason. They don't want to change their number because there might be somebody out there who's, they haven't talked to in 5 years that wants to get in touch with them.
100%.
And so having that number is important. So don't change your number because somebody might be calling. That's important to you. We want that. I think that's a key. And then anybody who is not in the military, again, like I say, one of the best things you can do is just who are the veterans, who are the active duty, who are the families in your own communities that might need a pat on the back.
Just make a connection.
That's right. Just you never know. We provide all kinds of things at the Gary Sinise Foundation. We provide grants. We fix cars. Whatever. I mean, if there's somebody needs their rent paid, whatever it is, we just want to help people through. We want to do a little more all the time to make sure that they know they're appreciated. We don't forget what they've been through. We don't take it for granted. And if we can help a little bit through a tough time, a difficult time, you know, we want to do that because we're grateful. We're grateful Americans for you and what your fellow service members do for us. And we'll never forget. We'll always keep doing a little more.
Well, Gary, you've modeled it every step of the way. There's an entire generation. Well, there's multiple generations of warfighters and their families and first responders that your legacy will live long beyond your time on this earth. And just know that. And that you've made a massive impact in so many lives. And we're grateful too. So God bless you, brother. Thank you for being on. Will you come back sometime?
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for serving.
All right. Yes, sir.
God bless you.
And thanks to everybody that watched this very special episode of the Scott Mann Podcast. Thanks to Gary for being on. If you like this episode, or if you know someone that could benefit from it, hey man, just share it with them. You know, that's what this podcast is about: is human connection, building relationships, social capital, and just something as simple as just sending this podcast to someone that maybe, because there's some stuff in here I guarantee you that would help somebody make meaning out of a tough spot in their life or find a little light in the darkness. If you don't mind leaving us a rating, we'd love that too, and make sure you subscribe. So thanks for what you do, and we'll see you on the rooftop.